I hear it was a late night.
Wasn't too bad.
We're at 7. We're at 7. Just doing a little quick look here.
Looks like you have 4 that I can see.
Yeah, I think we have 4. I know a couple are, I got a note on a couple of them, so I think we need one more, right?
Yep.
Andrew's
Did I make
connecting
it
now.
tomorrow? Oh, I'm sorry.
Hello.
Hey, Andrew. Perfect. We can. You give us the almighty quorum. So I will call the FinCom meeting to order, March 3rd, 2021. Mark, you don't have a, yeah, do you? No, right? Okay. Perfect. So got a healthy agenda on lots of special guests. One of the benefits of being on Zoom, we would not fit all in the room otherwise. Again, just kind of looking through the agenda. I actually just wanted to, and Jackie, I'm sorry, I probably should have mentioned this one before, but just one kind of housekeeping thing for the FinCom members. Sean Jacobs resigned from FinCom effective last week. He had newborn and wife is now working nights. So as much as I begged him, I know, but he makes a lot of sense. So we're down to 8 of us at this point, and then just for tonight's attendance, Dan reached out, said he's under the weather, so he won't be able to join either. So I just wanted to give you folks that that update, and now we can kind of jump into the regular agenda. I think the first one is to go through the snow and ice budget and the deficit spending. Is there something that we need to talk through, Bob, or is it just, we kind of moving straight to it?
Sharon can do that.
I can go over it.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Sharon.
This is kind of an annual tradition.
I know, and I saw you, and I'm sorry, Sharon. I knew that. Apologies.
So it's kind of a routine item. Typical years we do a vote for deficit spending. Not quite sure if we'll need it or not. We have about $60,000 left in the budget. But you do have in your packet a memo from Bob, basically stating his intent to approve, subject to your approval, deficit spending for snow and ice. The way we typically work it is we will do deficit spending, but then at April town meeting, we will fund that deficit so that we don't have to raise it on the recap. So it's sort of a formality, just one of those things that in order for it to be legal, FinCom has to approve it. We shouldn't be deficit spending without your knowledge. So it just would require a vote of the board.
Great. Any discussion, any questions? No, actually, I should, with all the people here, I should be monitoring the participants in case anyone's raising their hands, but I don't see any. So I'll entertain a motion on this.
And it could just be to approve deficit spending in snow and ice as presented.
Motion to approve deficit spending in snow and ice as
Thank you,
presented.
Andrew. Second.
Second.
Thanks, Eric. I'll go to a vote, and I'll do it as I see you. Mary Ann?
Yay. Or yes.
I'll go, we'll take either. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, both are good. Mark?
Yes.
Jean?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
And Andrew?
Yes.
All right, that is, that's all of us. Ed, yes. So that, all set, Bob. You're good to go.
This is like the Groundhog Day principle as to whether you'll have more or less winter. So if you voted, I think there's usually shorter winter.
That's there we go. That's what we're all angling for. It's our own little groundhog. So yeah, so hopefully it'll mean early spring. Cool. So I think now we just kind of go over to the financial update, and now we're starting with you, Sharon.
Yep, I'll share my screen if I can. Okay, so the revenues start on page 7 of your packet, but this is page 9, gives us a detailed look at the projections for revenues in a detailed format. And so you can see that for fiscal 22, we're projecting a 3.4% increase over prior year. That number is derived by taking the levy from the prior year, increasing it by 2.5%, and then adding in the new growth number for the new year, which we have at 800,000, and then excluded debt. So for local revenues, we're looking at a 6.6% increase over prior year. We're expecting some recovery of some of those lost revenues from the pandemic. Although if you look back at fiscal 20, you can see that we are still lower than what we were back in fiscal 20 for local revenues, still keeping it somewhat conservative, not knowing what the future holds. Motor vehicle excise and meals tax and interest earnings were definitely hit very hard during the pandemic. So it's hard to know what will fall out, but that's the projections we came up with, and hopefully we do better than that. State aid, we have it flat. Guidance that we are hearing is that we're not going to see state aid go down, but we don't want to be optimistic and think it's going to go up or project any kind of an increase. So you see that it's level to the prior year. And then we have transfers and other available funds up 0.9 or down 0.9%. So we have reduced 3% for RMLD's earning distribution. Our earnings distribution is now linked to sale of power and all of that. And so conservatively, we weren't sure where that number was going to fall out there. So we have a reduction there, but it does sound like it may be a low number. And so that could be something we could revisit at a future town meeting and use as a funding source if that turns out to be the case. And we also reduced the overlay surplus. So we release some of our overlay and we use it as a funding source for the subsequent year. It's a reduction of $50,000. So we've been trying to reduce it year to year. Back in the fall, you recall that we talked about a number of about $3 million for free cash use. Bob was able to whittle down the number to $2,775,000 by speeding up some of the capital funding to be voted at Springtown meeting using fiscal 21 funds or surplus that we have there. And then he also had some reductions in health insurance premiums. So he was able to get that number down a little bit for us. And so from $3 million to $2,775,000. So those are our revenues. Does anybody have any questions regarding those revenues?
I don't see any, Sharon.
Okay, I'm going to stop my share.
Okay, I'll just make a couple of introductory remarks. Hopefully you were able to read just a short overview I wrote. I think it starts on page 3 of the budget document. And again, I appreciate your help finding typos and things that don't make sense. We kind of threw this together quickly, but seemed to be okay. Some of the risks to this budget, Sharon has kind of hit the revenue side. Clearly there are some revenue risks. Related to revenues is the use of free cash. There's a risk that you're building a cliff that's going to be hard to sustain. But I have to say that, with the town's free cash position and the fact that this is the proverbial rainy day, I really don't feel as badly as I thought I would if we ever used $3 million. So, I think we're in good shape, and I think FinCom has been really spot on in your analysis of how to keep services going during this difficult time. You did see from Sharon's presentation, there are some revenues that are lower, but clearly in Massachusetts, we're far better off than some states and some municipalities. that rely on property taxes, not fixed 2.5%, but whatever it does. So in the good years, it might go up 7%. In the bad years, it might go down 5%. So, in this case, Prop 2.5 is certainly a cushion for us. Other risks on the budget side, I'd really only see one that's pretty significant, and that's COVID costs. We did not include any COVID costs in this budget on purpose. Sharon updated us today that we have still a little over $1 million in federal grant money available to be used through next December 31st. Given that we've only used a little over $1 million in the previous 9 months, and that things seem to be improving, I'm pretty comfortable that $1 million that remains would seem to take us through December pretty well, unless something dramatically changes. And if it does dramatically change, then we're exposed for the second half of the year. And this is a similar discussion as to one we had last fall, because the grants were due to expire last December. And we were concerned about the second half of the current year. So we did fund some COVID costs for that, including increasing the FinCom reserves. And as it turned out, the applicability of the grants was extended another year. So, hopefully your reserve fund and our COVID funds are just not being used as much as we feared. But that's another risk in FY22 if something goes wrong. In terms of what you're going to see for the next 2 meetings, you'll see the 8 department heads. Tonight, you'll see the library, administrative services, public services, and finance. That's 4 department heads. And then if time allows, public safety, the 2 chiefs. I'm also going to say a few things. That's up to 6 department heads. And then next week, public works, including the enterprise funds and facilities. That's the other 2 town department heads. Next week, we're also going to talk a lot about non-department costs, such as shared costs, benefits, debt, capital. And there's some pretty important discussions to be had in those areas. As you requested in the fall, this budget does increase capital / debt spending above 5%. I think it's about 5.4 or 5.5. And it purports to do that in the capital plan for, I think, 3 years. And that can be adjusted, as needed, just like we did last June. But we are heading a little bit more towards debt. When I got here, when I was on FinCom and then got here, in my estimation, we were very, very heavy with debt. We had just done some elementary schools inside the levy, which was the primary reason. But our debt service was a killer. And in a very naive way, I guess, I look at debt service, I look at interest that you pay for debt service as kind of a sunk cost, a useless cost. It's not providing a service to the community. Now, there's lots of other reasons you should borrow and spread costs out over periods of time. So it's not that it's useless, but we were paying well over $1 million a year in interest costs and have got that significantly down over the years. But we are now heading back up in the debt picture. We just borrowed last week for the enterprise funds, which is why you've got a revised budget packet for them. And it's just a slight caution that, the progress we'd made on really not using debt has reversed a little bit. And that's because, of things such as the building security project, next year, the Parker School roof, the stadium track and turf, the turf that was done, turf 2 that was done at the high school. These are things that, in the multiple millions of dollars can't be paid for any other way. You really can't, you could, but to take $4 million out of free cash, to use for a project would be almost unheard of. So it's just another slight caution on the debt service number going up again. But again, we just had a conversation with S&P. And one of our strengths is our debt profile is so low compared to almost any other city or town. We have a low amount of debt, and perhaps even more importantly to them, we have a very low maturity of debt. It's very short, so it pays off quickly. But that's just another thing I'll talk about a little more next week. There are some themes in this budget that I won't go over now, but maybe as departments speak, you'll see them. I addressed them in my overview. Some of it addresses the times that we're in. Some of it looks ahead a little bit. The thing I want to emphasize is that, the budget is more than just a series of numbers. It's a philosophy. And I can't even tell you how tired and confused we all are as to what day of the week is sometimes. The last year has been very difficult. Most department heads are working hours they could have never imagined. And I think maybe the most difficult part is there's no end in sight. If we knew that the bell was going to ring on a certain day, I think that would feel psychologically better. So, I've thanked the employees in my overview, and I'll do it here. Just a tremendous job. 98, 99% of our employees have been outstanding. Exactly what you'd hope for. And I also thank the schools in my write-up. I expect them to behave the way they have, but I also appreciate it. We're a team, we're a family. And, Reading has pulled through this in many ways very well. We're seeing the best of a lot of things that go on in the organization. And at the same time, we're hearing a louder volume of complaints from the community, which is just unfortunate. And I'm not blaming anyone, it just is what it is. I am concerned about, physical and mental health in the community, in the organization. That's something that the budget can't solve. We've taken a very small step to, go down that path. But, if you were to ask me my number one concern for the next 12 months, that's probably it. Is, physical health is always a concern until someone rings the COVID bell and says it's over. And then mental health and stress is just appearing daily. So with that, I'll turn it over to Amy to start discussing the library. And again, I'll revisit you in public safety when I want to talk a little about the health department. So thank you.
Amy, just before you get started, Bob, I'll just, kind of take a moment. Thank you for, that opening, and then, kind of what you kind of said. It's, it was reassuring. I think it's, stuff that we talk about, from meeting to meeting. And it's great to see that, kind of bear out collaboration and all the hard effort. Now, and just, again, from my perspective, and again, just one person, but a huge thanks, to you and to the staff for everything that you've, kind of done during this, unprecedented time. And, and a lot of what you wrote in there, definitely rang true. I can definitely appreciate it, and share a lot of the same concerns that you just echoed. So.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you. So first, I'd like to just recognize Nina Panacchia, who's from the Board of Trustees, and Alice Collins. I see you both on the call, so thanks for being here. I'm sure they'd be happy to answer questions should you have them. So I'll go ahead and share this. And you all have this document, I hope, in your handouts. So it's just sort of there to keep you visually entertained. It's always fun to go first. Just some notes about our department overview. The Reading Public Library this year had a very interesting time. We were up for our periodic strategic plan. We have to file that with the Board of Library Commissioners every few years, and it helps us with eligibility for grants and some other things. So this was a really interesting year to do surveys and find out what the community needed and figure out stakeholders and things like that. But we did update our mission as well as our core values, and you can see that listed here. It's also available on our website. So I'm really happy to share that at any time. We did put a lot of time and effort. There are a lot of different people involved, put a lot of time and effort into the document. So if you're interested in seeing where we see the library going over the next 3 to 5 years, it's a fun read. So part of that strategic plan does include a desire to create a new division of equity and social justice. And there is information about that, not only in the strategic plan, but there's a lot of information about that on our website. If you go to About, there's something about the Division for Equity and Social Justice. That's a combination of all the documentation that has brought us to date about why and how we would like to add this position in this division. As I said, this is a very interesting year. So when I went to go write my annual report, it was really tough. I'm not sure how the other departments managed, but I found myself reflecting about what were the highlights this year, in addition to my first pass at the annual report was just to say, we're still here. That's it. We made it through 2020. But I think one of the things I look back on over the year is how many of the cooperative and collaborative things that we all accomplished together this year. And I think, Bob kind of alluded to this about how people coming together. We worked with every single department that you see here on this call today. We worked with people, all sorts of interdepartmental things for the census, for the local and federal elections. As you know, we had early voting at the library. We've been helping with the Mask Up Reading. We worked with the folks at Pleasant Street Center and Dementia Friendly Reading on the neighborly notes. We had a COVID style new resident open house, and those are just a few of the things. So I think one of the things, if I had to say thank you, is for all the support and help that we get from all the other departments in the town. And I think we work actually quite well together. And I also just provided a very small snippet of the types of ongoing professional development. I think everybody here has been able to describe their job as not what they signed up for. But we definitely have had the opportunity this year to do a lot of learning and see a lot of opportunities for where we can continue our services going in the future. So just starting with the overall budget. Oh, actually, if somebody is watching, I can't see if anyone's raising their hand. So
I'll keep track of it for you, Amy.
Thank you, Ed. I can't see, so please give a holler and feel free to jump in if you have a question. So the summary of our budget is a request of 7.1% overall. It's a little higher than normal. Our wages do go up by 7.8%, and that is because of a new position. It's a new full-time, hit the ground running kind of position. So that's a little unusual. We generally tend not to ask for things like that, but we have this year. And part of that influences our expenses, which I'll get to in a minute. Administration is we only have 3 divisions in the library right now. And administration is our smallest division by salary wise, but you'll see a couple things that jump out here is that we have what looks like a rather large increase in our communications specialists. It's actually just an increase in hours from 20 to 25 hours. So it's actually quite small. In addition to communication, this person is it's really crucial to the work that we do, and we've added those hours to help out with backing up on service desks and providing other public services. So these hours are not new hours, but they've been shifted from another division. So we were able to transfer some hours from one division to another. I also want to do a quick note on here where you see support staff. That also includes library substitutes and library overtime. We didn't break it out, and those should have been combined. That was my fault. I didn't send Bob the right graph, but basically there is some money in there for substitutes and some money in there for overtime as needed, which is not very much. Moving on to expenses. We have a larger than usual increase in our materials due to the increase in salaries. This helps us stay above the minimum materials expenditure requirement. It's required for certification from the state. That we're always very lucky and very happy that the town supports us in making sure we do remain certified. We are currently in the 25,000 to 50,000 community size range. For that, the requirement is that our materials be at 13%. Our current population is a little on the smaller end of that. So the trustees have generally recommended a 14% budget in order to maintain the balance. What happens is the larger your community is, the smaller that expenditure requirement is, because you are larger, you have a little bit more to play with, and you can usually leverage or buy in bulk as it were. So the costs kind of go down incrementally, but we're still a small enough community that extra 1%, or in this case, 0.5%, is really, really helpful in helping us get the materials that we need. The new division that we're recommending and asking for, if you're not familiar with this, this has gone through an ad hoc committee with which we had representation from the schools, from the town. Bob was part of this, and the trustee member as well. It was about 2 years, I think, in the making. And the final recommendation, which Bob mentions in his cover letter, was to have a division in the library that's headed up by a director. It's a very similar model to the Reading Coalition that I'm sure Chief Clerk will tell you about, and the wonderful things that they're doing over in the police department. It is an educational and empowering and sort of engaging kind of position. So if you have any questions, please go to the website and hopefully you'll find the answers there. And if you don't find an answer to the question, please feel free to reach out, and I'm sure either I or the folks that were on the ad hoc committee might be able to find an answer for you. Okay. So that just leaves us with 2 other divisions. Public services, you see it drops a little bit. That's basically because we took things out of public services, put it in administration, and actually we moved a significant chunk to collection services. So in collection services, you see a 6.3% increase, and that's really because there was a support staff position at 25 hours a week, and that person retired. When COVID hit and we started really relying on our virtual and online services, we realized that we had not been keeping up with what we needed for the licensing and acquiring and access and cataloging and all of that stuff. We needed someone that would be focused on managing all of that. It unfortunately, adding electronic resources doesn't always mean reducing our physical resources, because I'm very proud to say that Reading still remains one of the top circulators of books and audiobooks. People really like to read in Reading, and that's something to be super proud of. They do appreciate books, but now we have a lot more people that appreciate online streaming, downloading of ebooks and audiobooks, as well as databases, and our language learning usage has increased. I guess people are learning a little Italian while they're at home during COVID. So this position that you see is new. It looks like a new Library 1 position. Again, it's just the repurposing of another part-time position. And then we took hours from public services to make it a full-time position, professional position. So that's the sum of it. That's the basic changes and everything that goes along. Stop sharing. There's not a lot of exciting things except for the new position. And our whole goal is to make sure that we're optimizing our staff and services and controlling our costs. Any questions?
Great, thanks, Amy. Any questions from anybody on the? I don't see any. Oh, Jean, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. So these are rather broad questions, and I don't know if they're better directed to you, Amy, or perhaps to Bob. But the library budget overall is going up 7.1%, and the rest of the department budgets are only going up, like on average, 2.5%, so smaller. I guess I'm wondering about the history of other department increases. So in the last, say, 5 years, have there been increases in the library budget that kind of go beyond other department budgets, or has it gone the other way? Has, a couple of years ago there was an increase in fill in the blank department and the library was a little lower? So I guess I'm a little bit concerned about equity. Can you talk to a little bit about that? And that might be more of a Bob and Sharon question.
Well, I can give you some quick answers. We did get money from the override to restore Sundays, which is something we had to cut back on. So I will also say that in general, the library continues to be about 1.5% of the entire budget. Since I've been watching how this has gone, so probably 2012, so maybe about a little less than 10 years, the library has never been more, it's been between 1.4 to 1.5% of the budget. That's both the expenses and salaries together. So proportionally, it remains. I couldn't give you the year-to-year numbers, but proportionally, we are traveling parallel. However, sometimes if you take a much bigger budget and you increase it by a certain percent,
yeah,
we fall behind. So in sometimes, even without this position, we would probably be about 1.4% or 1.48% or something like that of the entire budget. So we are keeping pace with our piece of the budget, as it were.
Okay.
And we have expanded services and things like that.
Okay.
Bob, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I agree with Amy. The way I look at it is, I think 1 year out of the last 10, we had all the departments go up by the same amount, more or less, but that's usually not practical. My impression for the last 10 or so years is that other departments other than the library go up more or less than the library, and the library, other than this year, tends to be more steadily in the middle. So let's say if our town departments are going up 3% every year, most years the library is real close to that 3% numbers, where some other departments might be 4, 5, or 2.
Okay.
They tend to be kind of more steady in the middle. And this year, you know, if you took away the new position, I don't remember the exact number, but they'd be much closer
2.9.
to, again, what the other departments are doing.
Yeah, it would be 2.9 or 2.9 and change
Yeah.
or something like that.
Okay.
So,
So the
you know, so
entire
the question
increase.
is, if the new position was going to exist in the organization, in theory, it could be anywhere. And it just happens to be in the library, as opposed to the library decided they needed more money for something just
Right.
uniquely to them.
I got you. And I have one more follow-up question, and I think either of you could answer it or both. Bob, you alluded to this in your budget message, the RCASA structure, and that it was that you appreciated that structure. Can you just give me a sense of exactly how this position reports and how that structure fits? I'm a little bit unclear on that. If someone could give me some
Oh.
color on it.
Sure. I mean, I'll tell you my perspective. I
Okay.
know Erica very well. Erica McNamara is the head of the Reading Coalition. I think you probably know her too.
Yep.
She reports to the chief, and then the chief reports to the select board, well, to Bob
Yep.
and the select board. So this person would report to me, and I report to the Board of Trustees, and it's the same accountability in terms of writing strategic plans or action plans for each year, following through. The side piece to that, which it also happens with the Reading Coalition, would be an advisory board. So it's not a town mandated through bylaw or charter. There's no authority, there's no policy making, there's no enforcement or anything like that. It's simply, as it is with the coalition, a bunch of really interested and involved community members that want to make the town better, offering their time and their expertise and their experience on how to approach some specific problems. And they would advise this position.
That answers my question. Thank you.
Marianne, I know you got your hand up too.
Hi, I have a couple of questions. I'm just going to follow up with my second one first, because it builds on what Jeannie asked with this, the new director of equity and social justice. And just trying to understand what this position does. Can you walk me through, say the town had an incident like what we've had in the past with racist graffiti, or say there was like a conflict in a town department that discrimination might be alleged or something. What would the person in this position do in that situation?
Well, and I'll invite, I mean, the first thing, you've offered two things. So in the case of there's a conflict and a discrimination case, the first thing that would do would be to go to HR. In this case, the director of HR, Sean Donahue, and it probably involve any union officials and the department head, and that's where it would start to go. So the issue is not focusing on, this person is not there to fix all of those issues. If it was a graffiti incident or some sort of, actual civil rights violation, it would be reported to the police. The difference here, though, is that if it's not officially reported, in the case that someone may not feel safe or may not know whether they have a right to, they could call this person and say, hey, this was just said to me. Is this something I should follow up? Or I'm not really sure about that HR director. And I know I love Sean, so I can say that because I see him on the call. So, that HR director is really suspicious, and I think he has it out for me. So I'm not sure. I'm a little scared. What should I do? So this person's not going to be a lawyer. This person is not going to be providing legal advice in any way. There are channels through which all of these things are going right up to the Massachusetts level as well as the federal level for civil rights in that situation. So,
okay, I didn't know whether this person was going to like track the stuff and say, oh, we've had 4 of these things happen in 4 months. Maybe the library should run a program on this for the community, like something.
Yeah, that would be
Under their
something. I mean,
wheelhouse.
obviously there's, yes, and there's a freedom, you know, obviously we can request through the same channels, the reports that go to the police. If there are reports from other places, hopefully we would be able to hear from that from the schools. I think one of the things that is really important to realize here, this is not one person to come fix everything. This is a hugely collaborative position. So this is not about hiring the one silver bullet that's going to help everybody wash their hands and think everything's okay. This is about how do we engage the schools? How do we engage the police department? How do we engage our colleagues, our residents, the people who worship and educate and are educated here? How do we get them involved to help solve the problems that we see coming in? Or hear the voices that we don't have, you know, find a space for those voices. So this is not one person solving all those problems. It's one person working together to collaborate. So just like I work with Erica.
Amy, if I could just jump in, I'm on the board of the library trustees. I'm Nina Pinocchio. I think another thing that's really helpful with the structure as it's designed is that it allows the town departments to sort of be on the same page a little bit when it comes to communication and programming. So it's not like the school department doing their own thing and then, you know, adults in the community doing something different. It's going to be a way to kind of share resources and share programming on a more broad sense in the community. So I think that it's really helpful to think of it in that sense as well, that it won't be in different silos. It will be more community based because the library already does so much in terms of really effective programming for people of all ages. So I think that that's kind of really helpful to kind of remember too with the structure as it's proposed.
Okay, my other question is unrelated to this, and this is on page 50. I'm looking at page 58 in my budget. It's the Public Services Division budget question. So this is probably for Amy. So maybe this was something I wasn't on FinCom last year to ask. I'm a little confused about this, the tracking over the years of the Sunday hours, because as I'm reading public services, it's for, I think, in-person events, or maybe now you have some virtual things. But so I could see in FY21 why that went down, because you couldn't have in-person things for a lot of, I'm sorry, in FY20, you know, for the start of it, everything had to shut down. But I guess I'm just confused about the tracking of in the FY21 budget, and maybe those aren't actuals, maybe that's what it was budgeted for, and in FY22. So are we expecting to be able to have a level of in-person public services on Sundays that exceeded what we did in FY19 in the next coming year? I mean, still.
Yeah. So a lot of that has to do with the fact that we budget for a certain amount. And Bob will tell you this, we do return sometimes we return very little on our Sundays, and sometimes we don't. When someone works a Sunday, so if you take someone who's at step 2 or step 1, we pay them their overtime. If someone is at step 13, we have to pay their overtime. So that could be, you know, that's a 12% difference. So we have to budget assuming that the most experienced person will be working on Sunday, because we don't know. So what happened was from FY19, we probably returned a significant chunk of money or used it for, you know, for retirement or something. So that we have to budget. What you don't want to do is assume that everyone in there is going to be making the most minimum amount of money, because then you're going to run out of budget. Also, each year, believe it or not, this sounds really weird, sometimes there's 33 Sundays and sometimes there's 31 Sundays, and that's a difference of about $3,000 to $4,000.
Yeah, it just seemed like when I looked at like FY21 and 22 versus 19, it's like a 45% increase, or like it was just a lot more. And I thought, well, FY21 anyway.
Yeah,
we're not.
That's because you're not looking at what was requested.
Okay.
You're looking at the actuals. Okay, so more than that was probably requested. That number usually goes up by whatever the percentage is that Bob had said. So if we had given the guidance, I think this year it was 2.75%. We didn't use that. We actually cut it back so that we could transfer some hours to collection services. And we knew we had some extra money there, so we knew we could bring it down a little. But what happens is there's a number, and then everybody gets a COLA and or a step or whatever that combination is. So we have to assume that the whole chunk is going to go up by 2.75% or 3% or 4%. So it moves up incrementally, and it's just a number that occasionally we've gone over. More often, I don't know, maybe you could equate this to the snow, but more often than not, or maybe it's the opposite, it's no, more often than not, we are under budget on that.
Yeah, no, because I would have expected, given what collection services is, and I wasn't really aware of the divisions until I had looked at this budget, that collection services would have been busier than public services in the pandemic.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you, that's all.
Andrew?
Thanks, Ed. My question goes kind of in line with what Marianne was asking, and I just want a little bit more clarification as far as it goes to the equity and social justice position. So just to be clear, this is really a utility or the position really is a utility or a tool for the town to use collectively. But as a position, it's really, they can take reporting, right? Not in a legal sense, but as in a general reporting sense. And the position is really to develop in QA/QC.
I don't know what that means. Could you define that?
Quality control, kind of take an overview with programming and development as it relates to social justice and equity. Or is it just a position that's going to take reporting and review and disseminate the information?
Well, it would be programming and educational initiatives. So again, be working with the schools, be working with every town department that I think Nina mentioned this. So
yeah,
right now
she kind of did. I just wanted a little clarification.
Yeah. So for example, right now there's HRAC, which is the Human Relations Advisory Committee. And those are entirely volunteer groups. So they try to do one program a year, which is the Martin Luther King Day, which if you haven't seen the video this year, it was great. They did a great job putting that together. But those are volunteers that have other daytime jobs and are trying to work really hard on doing additional programming. And this person would be able to sort of either help with the actual programming or connect the work that's going on in the Wood End Elementary School with something that's going on with, the Rise, not the Rise Peace Crystal, but I don't know, Creative Arts or another group in town or the Clergy Association, and put those things together and tie in other groups so that there are people working together to get more of a product out there.
Okay, thank you. That was it.
I don't
Okay.
see any other questions. Amy, thank you so much for that. And Nina, thank you as well for providing some of that clarity on the equity and social justice. I think that was very helpful, to get to some of those details. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Who's next?
I think next is,
After Amy broke the ice, it's tough going first.
next is Matt Cornelis for Administrative Service.
I thought it might be me. Okay, let me just see.
And for all town department heads, if you want me to share the budget document, I can do that.
I have it up. I could share it, or you could share it, Bob. Whatever you want.
It's your choice.
Well, let me just see if I could do it. And can everybody see it?
Sure can. Thanks, Matt.
Okay. So we have the Administrative Services Department budget before you here. Just a quick overview. The Administrative Services budget supports all town boards and departments. We provide communications needs, technology, HR, procurement, document management, elections, insurance, including safety and claims coordination, and also legal services. And as you can see, the budget this year is up 1.7%. So I like to call it a modest level services budget. Remain at 17.5 FTEs, so staffing levels are the same. And I want to go, we have 5 divisions, and I want to just go quickly through each of the divisions that you'll have in your budget and tell you a little bit about the divisions and then a little bit about the increases or decreases. So first we have the operations division, and they're responsible for procurement, communications, risk management, constituent services. Also shared staff is found in this division, as well as postage and equipment maintenance. We have a level services budget here. This budget is up 2.1% in wages and 3.6% in expenses. And you'll see that throughout the budgets, that most of them are pretty consistent. I highlighted before, when I went before the select board, a few of the COVID-19 impacts that impact the budget and continue to impact the budget. Like Bob was saying, it really does have a big impact on our day-to-day business. So for operations, we've had a stagger staff. We've had more mailings. We've had increased communications electronically. And we've also coordinated a lot of public information campaigns that you might have seen out there, including the Safe Voting campaign and the Mask Up Reading campaign. The next division is the technology division. And as you might expect, that includes centralized computer, telecommunications services, network management, audiovisual, software, computer support, and GIS mapping. That budget is up 2.4% in wages and 4.5% in increased in expenses, as you can see on your budget document. And so again, just a modest increase on both. The COVID impacts that we've had in technology have been great with the use of remote hardware for people and software, new software for employees, remote employees. Also the use of Zoom, like we're actually using right now, and we've used for a lot of meetings, and Zoom webinar, which we've used for our online town meeting. And we plan to use that again for our town meeting in April. And we've moved to more online permitting. So there was a lot going on in technology this year, and continues to be next year as well. The next division we have is the Human Resources Division, and they're responsible for hiring, training, testing. It's important to note that we serve all the town departments, also the school department, the light department, and retirees when it comes to benefits. So it is a fairly large area of work that HR is responsible for. The budget impact this year is a very small increase in wages, just 0.1%, and a larger increase in expenses. And that's more due to increased hiring and training. As you can see, a lot of the line items that have gone up have to do with employee physicals, training, certificates, things like that, and even advertising jobs. So there's a little bit of an increase there in the expenses, but it is greatly needed. And the COVID impact we've had in HR has been increased tracking of federal and state policies and increased employee issues due to COVID. Sean Donahue is our new HR director. He's doing a great job. He's on the call tonight, and he's been busy nights and weekends as well, dealing with these issues. So I have to give him a lot of credit for hitting the ground running just as soon as COVID started. He was on board and really has helped us out quite a bit since he's been there. Town manager's office is also within administrative services, and that includes the select board, the finance committee. Also legal services are housed in the town manager's office. We're asking for a 3% increase in wages, a 3.4% increase in expenses. And the COVID impact is we've had a lot more time town manager and his staff spent on emergency management issues and increased work hours, like we said, for all departments. It's really increased a lot for Bob, again, nights and weekends every week. And the last division, it's actually two divisions if you separate out elections, but it's town clerk and elections. And in that division is elections, voter registration, census, town meeting, licenses and document storage. This is the part of the budget that's a little bit of an outlier, as you can see. It's gone down considerably, and that is because we're planning for fewer elections, a lot fewer elections in FY22. So I think we're going from 4 elections down to just 1, the election that's coming up this April. So the wages have decreased 60.8%, and the expenses have decreased 4.2%. And that's really almost solely because of the fewer elections. And you'll see that in my budget from year to year. Next year, I may be asking for, I'm sure I'll be asking for an increase in those line items because we'll have more elections, I know. So that's how it just goes, you know, from year to year. And we've talked about different ways to deal with that, but currently it is in my budget. And the COVID impact for the town clerk's office is the early and mail-in voting that we did, the virtual town meetings that we did last year and will continue to do this year, and for we don't know how long, as long as COVID lasts, I guess. And the town clerk was able to move a lot of her functions outdoors. It became a little bit too cold to do it outdoors during the winter, but before the winter and probably now into the spring, she could do marriage intentions and whatnot outside. So it was a change for us. So all in all, like I said, it's a modest increase in the budget, and I'm happy to answer any questions people might have regarding any specific lines or any specific divisions. So.
Thanks, Matt. Any questions from anybody on the committee? I don't see any.
Okay.
Great.
And I'll stop
Thanks,
the
Matt.
share.
Thanks, Sean.
Short and sweet. Thank you.
I think I'm next. Public services. I'm not going to pull up the numbers because mine is pretty straightforward. So if there are questions, and Bob, if you want to pull it up at the end, maybe we'll try it that way because mine should be fairly quick. So public services is the biggest news is that we have some exciting changes brewing in terms of public health. And now we are planning for a 9th department head. And now the public health will be migrating over to public safety. And I'm excited to help out with the transition and looking forward to a lot of things that I'm sure Bob's going to cover later about the funding that's now being planned for public health. I've been extremely involved in that the past year, and well, for the past 11 years, but for the past year in particular, and it's been intense. And we've learned a lot, and I think we have a lot of good ideas going forward. The Board of Health has been phenomenal, and I just want to recognize their role in everything that's transpired over the past year. But certainly, I've been very happy to be part of the team, and Incident Command has been amazing. And now that's really the biggest news that we have going forward in terms of public health. But in terms of the specific budget before you for public services, in my mind, this is a level funded budget. It's 2.2% increase. So it's a roughly $1.6 million budget. And there's really nothing major to report in terms of the numbers of the budget, but the elements that go into this budget are really what I wanted to talk about. And there are a couple of things that we do in public services, maybe a little bit different than others, maybe not. But the things that we do to provide the services that we do within the budget that we have, basically living within. The way we do that is using a couple of techniques that I just want to highlight. The first one is community partners, and we talk a lot about that in public services. Erin Schaefer's on the call tonight. Thank you, Erin. She's our Economic Development Director. And one of the great examples of how we've been working with community partners is what Erin's been doing for the past year to assist local businesses, working hand in hand with the chamber, being a resource to businesses at a time when just an unprecedented time. That's all. I could go on and on, but that's really what it's been. And having a guidebook and a toolkit for how to assist businesses is something I'm very proud of, and I want to recognize Erin for taking the lead on that. But community partners are a major aspect of how we do what we do. The one other thing I'll say, and again, it relates to Erin, is we are working on a business improvement district. This is a little bit different thinking about creating a private run supplemental services organization that would, if everything goes right and it gets approved, that would supplement what we do, and would bring in a different structure so that the town isn't in the position of having to fund. We're talking about some different projects that we're working on, like lighting in the downtown, Haven Street in particular, so that we don't have to continue to go to DPW and say, can you work with us on a way to get more lighting downtown? Instead, we have what we call a district management organization in place with funding, that could take that on. And we would just be a seat at the table in that partnership. So partnering with other aspects of the community, creative ways to do the kinds of things that we want to do is really key to staying on budget. The second thing that we've done a lot of, particularly in the last year, past 6 months in particular, is, as Matt mentioned, relying heavily on technology. With all the boards, committees, and commissions that we have in public services, and I think we have over a dozen, probably one of the biggest of all the departments. The use of technology has been phenomenal, and obviously Zoom, we've been able to have public forums, public engagement, public outreach, and it's really allowed us to continue the work that we do. But one thing I wanted to highlight about technology is we also migrated over to a new technology for permitting. I was resistant in the beginning because I thought, could there be a worse time than in the middle of a pandemic to begin to shift over to a new software program for online permitting? And I thought, no, that's probably about the worst time. But for a variety of reasons, it needed to be done. And in the end, it worked out really well. And we are now online permitting for building and looking to expand that over into other areas. So kudos to the building staff, especially Kim Saunders, for taking the lead on that and figuring out how to make that work. We're very proud and working very efficiently with that in place. And now they're looking for more work. So I have to scare up some more things for them to do. The other thing that we do, again, to leverage resources is regionalization. And so we started, I don't know, maybe about 6 years ago, we formed a regional affordable housing office. We call it the Metro North Regional Housing Services Office. We hired one staff person and we serve 4 communities. Reading is the lead. And in the past year, we added a community, the city of Woburn. So we are able to really provide that level of expertise in Reading and with our fellow community partners, and do it at a price point that is reduced because we're sharing that cost. And then the last thing I wanted to highlight was collaboration. There's no way we could have gotten through what we did in the last year, especially in public health, without collaboration. And special kudos to the wonderful school nurses who were there every step of the way. They just jumped in and worked with us, and we all just got it done. And that was amazing. We also hired a couple of nurses. That was also really important. And we promoted Kevin Bowmiller to the community services director right before the pandemic, which was probably the best thing I've done in my 11 years since I've been here, because he's been a tremendous resource, and special thanks to him for helping us and guiding us with so much that we've had to do with, for example, Elder and Human Services, the thousands of phone calls that we've made to this vulnerable population, and continue to make, and continue to provide the services that they need. So those are kind of the basic tenets of how we are able to stay within a level funded budget and continue to provide a level of service that I'm very proud of. The nuts and bolts of the budget are pretty simple, and I'll sum it up real quick. There's a small increase in some of the salaries, mostly part-time. And again, that's very small. And there's a small increase in some expenses, and that's mostly in general admin. And it's something to the tune of $4,500 in areas like mileage and advertising and that kind of thing. And that is basically the budget. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Jean. Any questions from anybody on the committee? So, Jean, I actually have one question, and it kind of related to some of the some of the grants and some of the economic development. And again, I'm just more curious, and it's more in kind of in the recent past. I saw in the packet the number of kind of Reading establishments that got PPP loans. From a and again, just out of curiosity, from a town perspective, and maybe Aaron, did you help facilitate that in any way? You know what I mean? Like, through, do they use, kind of you as a resource in doing that? Or is that, just more kind of curious on that collaboration, Jean, to your earlier point.
Yeah, they definitely, Erin was a lifeline to the business community. And again, collaborating with the chamber, collaborating with anybody and everybody out there, so that it was basically one Reading, trying to get this things under control, provide resources where we could, and work with the community to keep people afloat.
Any other questions for Jean, Aaron, etc.? Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I think I'm up next.
Welcome back, Sharon.
So I'm sharing with you on the screen the finance department budget, which starts on page 36 of your packet. The finance department is made up of 3 divisions. So that would be general finance, which is made up of the treasury function, which is, funding things, debt borrowing and payroll, and then also collections. And then the assessors, which actually come up with our values and what we charge for our real estate taxes, and then accounting, which is all of our financial reporting and paying our bills and all of that. So you can see on the screen, the finance budget goes up 3% over prior year. Salaries are up 3.3%. We have all non-union staff in the finance department. And so the guidance from the town manager was a 2% step and a 0.75% COLA. The reason we're up a little bit more than the 2.75%, the 3.3% is because in accounting, we have a position that years ago we reduced to 32.5 hours a week. And I was looking to restore that back to 37.5 hours. It's better for office coverage, but also for cross-training. We're trying to get more depth in our staff and cross-train more with each position so that we're not more, vulnerable if somebody's sick. So that's helpful. And I felt that would be a better way of doing it because the position was harder to cross-train at 32.5. There's just too much to do. For the expenses, they're up 1.1%. You can see the numbers are very, very small. In the accounting division, we have a $200 increase in professional development. In the assessing area, we have a 1.3% increase in the assessing. The assessor is actually a regional employee, so it's an assessing admin fee that we have to pay to Wakefield because he's their employee. So per the contract, we have a 1.3% increase there. And in general finance, just a couple small increases in professional development, and I think a couple $100 again, and $300 I think for general office supplies. So not a lot going on there. So I would just leave that with any questions you might have had by reading through, because there's just not much going on.
Thanks, Sharon. Any questions from anybody? I don't see any, Sharon. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, I'll go next. Just like Al Haig, I'll present the public safety budget. For those of you that are old enough to understand that remark. I want to start with kind of taking a big step back and looking at the whole organization. This is something that the charter requires. It's called the Table of Organization. The recent charter change asked that this be put in and approved at every annual town meeting. And I just want to highlight a couple of the changes. Amy has already described one new division under the public library, which I think I did not put in one version if you have an old one. But I'm going to focus right now on what Jean mentioned, moving public health from public services over to public safety and adding a 9th department head, health director. So just visually, this is what that looks like. And I'll mention that the town of Reading is different than many other towns and cities, certainly in a lot of ways, but one of the most remarkable ones is the few department heads there are. Wakefield, who we're almost like brother and sister to, has more than double the amount of town department heads that we do. It's not good or bad, it's just that that's the way we're set up. So adding another department head in Reading is a big deal. I have never done it. I have rearranged department heads in the past, but adding one is kind of a big step for us. And so I'm certainly interested in FinCom's feedback and ultimately town meetings feedback. Let me share a budget screen. As proposed, as again, public health proposed, these would be the components of public safety: public health, fire, emergency management, and police. And then you all recognize two things sort of tucked under the police department. I'll just talk about public health and then I'll turn it over to the two chiefs. You can see that I'm requesting an 8% increase in the public health budget. That is from a very large increase that was done last year and during this year. If you recall, at November town meeting, we asked for some additional funds. So, this would in very short order take it from a $200,000 department to just under a $400,000 department. And then also a commensurate increase in expenses and as well. I'm sorry, expenses went down because there's a one-time request the Board of Health had, but I'll get into that a little bit more. And I'll stop there and say that this is kind of draft. The key to this whole situation, much like in the library, is who you hire for a new position. So I have budgeted 140-odd thousand as the health director. That's not just one person. That is a new health director plus retaining services of our current interim health director, Peter Morandi, who's been a godsend. We hope, and Peter has so far agreed to stay on for some kind of a transition, and as long as a new full-time health director, would have him. So this would be a combination of, I don't know, say maybe 1.25 FTEs, if you will, but we don't know yet. All the other expenses and wages are listed and are currently funded, but a new health director is going to have a lot of flexibility in terms of what he or she wants to do. So for instance, right now, we're at a run rate of about $80,000, a little bit less than that in health inspectors. You can see we've really bulked up the health nurse positions. We were spending less than 20,000 a couple of years ago, and that's proposed to go to 80,000. That doesn't mean ultimately that a new health director will agree with that. The new health director may decide to rearrange staffing, but this is just a placeholder. And then likewise, you see some expenses under that. Last summer, I began kind of exploring other cities and towns as to how they're set up in public health. And the first thing I realized is it's going to be really hard to hire anyone right now. They're all pretty busy. So Jean found someone that set me on the path of a recent retiree. Peter had just retired in February, perfect timing, just before the pandemic. And we met, and I kind of played the sympathy card that, geez, all your life you've been working to, be prepared for a pandemic, and you missed it. Wouldn't you love to join us? And foolishly, he said yes. And even more foolishly, he's still here. Again, he's done a remarkable job. And, we also kicked around some ideas, both with him and Jean, as well as some other cities and towns on my sort of journey of, what should a public health department look like? And I have to be honest that what I'm proposing, I didn't see anywhere. I didn't really hear much about it, but when I talked to people about it, they were really excited. They thought that public health and public safety really did belong together because they're working so collaboratively during the pandemic. Maybe a year or two ago, inspecting restaurants, inspecting septic systems, maybe that wasn't such a close alignment with public safety. But at least I believe that the impact of the pandemic will be seen for years. And I don't necessarily mean from a physical health, physical risk standpoint. I certainly hope that goes away. I just think behaviorally will change. And I think the emphasis on public health will be larger. I can't exactly predict what it will look like, but I just think it will be larger. And we've had a great deal of success putting former RCASA, currently the coalition, under the police department. It is a social service. It was unusual when Reading did that 12 years ago to tuck it inside of a police department. I think it was maybe the only one of two in Massachusetts that had done that. And since that's become a model, that is now the better way to do business is, that function needs to work so closely with the police department that that's really where it belongs. And some communities have made the change. Whether that works out for health or not, it's going to take years to figure that out. But the people, again, I talked to in the profession that at the same time they were exhausted, they were also really excited at the idea and thought it was really looking ahead, sort of very progressively. And I know Peter is very excited to be part of kind of the effort to transition over. So again, the resources, the financial resources requested are substantially higher than they were 2 years ago. The Board of Health has been terrific, as Jean mentioned. They will certainly have a large hand in the work of the department going forward. I made a presentation to them at a recent meeting, and they didn't vote anything, but they certainly seemed to think it was interesting, and they appreciated, the increased attention and the increased funding. And one thing, and I'll talk a little out of school here, and hope that some other towns aren't watching. One thing I've learned in the last few months is the health region we're in needs some leadership, let's just say. We are in a public health region that goes to our north and our west. There's some certainly very capable public health directors in that area. But we're seeing a lot more collaboration in the Wakefield, Melrose, Malden district in terms of getting together and offering things than we are in the district we're in. And some of my colleagues as department heads know from emergency management planning, when we go to a meeting, we usually arrive 10 or 12 thick, and most towns bring 2. And when Reading comes into these emergency management meetings, they're acknowledged as, if something really happens, you guys are going to have to run it because you work so well together. So I like to think that that philosophy and that style of collaboratively working together and, being a leader when it's needed might benefit the region. And, hiring the right person in health, giving them, perhaps a little bit more, panache by being one of the 9 department heads and being tucked inside of public safety, might allow Reading to become a leader. Someone needs to be more than there is I guess is all I'll say. And it is a pandemic, so it's not a complaint. It's really just an observation. So again, this is what's proposed, the new health director. I'm going to ask the select board at a future meeting to add this to the classification chart. We had funds that's available anyways to hire the position sooner than July. I don't usually like to do that because I'm essentially going outside of FinCom or town meeting. What I've said to Mark as chair was I would like to propose this position once FinCom has voted on a budget, then I'll feel a lot more comfortable that this is something that at least one of the bodies has agreed to, and then town meeting will be next. So when you have concluded and voted on St. Patrick's Day, if you like this setup, we'll start looking for a health director as soon as possible. We don't think it'll be fast. No responsible person is going to quit a job during a pandemic. So we'll have to see, how we can market the position and structure it to attract someone. But, when you're looking for someone that's at this level, you need to be patient and you need to hire the right person. You don't need to just fill the job. You just need to do it carefully. And again, kudos to Peter and to Jean especially for doing heroic amounts of work, sort of from that administrative top position in the meanwhile. So I'm happy to field any questions about health before you go on to fire and police.
Thanks, Bob. Any questions from anyone? Yeah, I'll start. And Bob, and this is just, again, probably a really naive question, and especially considering that we're in the middle of a pandemic. But from a kind of a public, kind of health, in this kind of position, just in general. And I know we do a lot of, kind of share, or we try to get into a position where we can of like, collaborating with another town, and was that kind of explored at all as far as is there something where you could do like a kind of a shared thing between 2 towns or 3 towns or something like that? Or I'm not sure if that's applicable or not. But
yeah, no, that's a good question. And we, years ago, we were part of a 3 community collaboration, and that was just too many communities. We dropped out. It just wasn't working. Whereas it worked great before and after we left with just 2. Again, one of the things that the pandemic has brought about is, a realization of the demarcation lines between the different state recognized public health regions. When we would go to our emergency management meetings, I started years ago saying, so police is in one region, fire is in a different one, and public health is in a different one. I hope we don't ever have a pandemic because they all were in different geographical emergency management regions, which is completely insane. The public health region, well, none of the regions really sort of mattered too much, respectfully, until the pandemic hit. And then all of a sudden, we were told very specifically by the state, you belong in your region, you do not wander out of that region. So that's kind of been an educational tool. If these regions, and lately there's been a little relaxing for collaboration reasons. I mean, we do things with Wakefield all the time, but we can't in public health. I know Jean and Peter have looked at 2 other communities that are looking to beef up their health department. They're not in our, in our current region. One is not. So, we would hope that the state would allow us to be a little more flexible going forward in order to partner, and whether it's, a formal partnership that's actually in the budget or an informal resource sharing, doesn't really matter. So yeah, we're real open-minded, and and a new hire will be a key part of that decision. And Jean, I don't know if there's anything you want to add about that.
I could go on for about 5 or 6 hours on this topic, but I will make it really short. There's a wonderful document that's on the state website that the governor's task force on public health came out with a report a couple of years ago. And they've identified this particular issue in public health as being something that is a weakness, I think, across the country, certainly across the state. And so the Blueprint for Excellence identifies this gap and this lack of regional collaboration in public health. There are some regions that do collaborate and that do provide a deeper reach to public health. And I'll point out some in the North Shore. My colleague from the city of Peabody has been instrumental in organizing that regional group. And that was through state funding. And she was also on the governor's task force. So this is the direction that the state is going in, where they want to see more of this. And this is something that Peter Morandi and I are working very hard on. We have a meeting tomorrow to discuss this idea of going after some state money and trying to forge more of a regional collaboration. And so stay tuned. We'll see how we do. Thank you.
Go ahead, Jean.
On mute. Um, so Bob, when you were talking about the health director position, you sort of alluded to this, but I want to, I guess, ask you to go a little bit further. The increase in budget is clearly COVID driven, right? It was stable until COVID hit, and then it was the big ask, and now we're maintaining there. So I really do appreciate everything, particularly that Jean just said about where the state's going and regionalization. I get all that, but I guess I'm thinking past a COVID world, and maybe it's a year or 2 or 5 away, I don't know, but I do imagine at some point we will be past this pandemic. What other aspects in this area that aren't COVID do you see an increased need in that has perhaps been underserved in the past couple of years? I guess a different way to ask the question is, clearly COVID has put an emphasis on this. Clearly COVID has made us spend money here. That all makes sense, but we're permanently creating a new position. So what are the needs other than COVID, which will eventually go away, that are driving that? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Let me just share my screen again. You know, in round numbers, 100,000 of this figure is a new position, health director, and the 40,000 is part-time. So in theory, let's go down the road a couple of years and there's no more COVID. This is probably $100,000 line item. Health inspectors, that's 1 and a fraction health inspectors. Health inspectors are tough. That's not so much COVID driven really right now, but health inspectors are tough because, you know, we generally have full-time or part-time employees that work during the typical work week. And health inspectors need to often work weeknights and weekends. So, you know, this might be something that a new health director, you know, looks at differently in terms of how to do it. You know, we don't know, but the 80-odd thousand for health inspectors is probably both a during COVID and a post-COVID world. 80,000 for a public health nurse. Years ago, I would have said that's more than we need. So again, post-COVID, maybe we don't need that. Maybe we just need 1 full-time or 2 part-times. I tell you, having 2 part-time instead of a full-time is so much more flexible. So to the extent we're fortunate to have 2 great part-timers now, it is awesome. So, you know, what I'm saying and why I showed this is there's probably some financial resources in this budget that post-COVID won't be needed. So then the question is, you know, is there some other health area, as you mentioned, that is needed, or do you just, you know, move it to somewhere else? I know past boards of health have been more interested in being proactive about, you know, nutrition and good health generally. So, you know, a lot of this had to be obviously put on the sidelines, but there was definitely some interest in, you know, almost paralleling the Arcasa model in some ways, in terms of health and wellness. You know, the coalition has changed from being against something and a preventing something to a helping something. And so, you know, public health probably will also morph in that direction. And, you know, that's why they're hopefully going to be sitting next to the coalition to have a little influence, to more proactively reach out and do positive things in the community and just not prevent negative ones, I guess. But I'll leave that up to the Board of Health and the new health director as to specifically what areas of public health that would be.
Thank you. That's actually incredibly helpful. And yeah, I think you're seeing some of what you're describing a lot in the private sector, the shift away from health insurance merely being what you used to when you go sick, to covering things like gym memberships and nutritionists to help prevent you from getting sick. So I, for one, am looking forward to a world where we're not talking about COVID and talking about being better and well. That sounds really good. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mark. Thanks, Gene.
Thanks, Ed. Just to add a little bit to what Bob was saying also, and maybe add a little bit more to the answer to your question, Gene. The past several boards of health have felt that much more was needed to be done and felt they needed to get more engaged in a lot of activities. And we ended up having a lot of turnover in the Board of Health because the role became too much of a burden. And there was a need, and I think Bob recognized and worked with it to kind of shift where the responsibility needed to be back into kind of the health department instead of the board itself. So I think, to me, this is also a part of that activity going on, where there just is so much more need and opportunity in health in general. The board wouldn't be the right place for it. It really was the department. And this is really kind of recognizing that and leveraging it to the benefit of the town and the board.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Any other questions for Bob on health? Not his health specifically, just the health position. Sounds good. Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it. That was very helpful.
Hey, Ed.
Oh, sorry. Did I miss you, Andrew? Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I forgot to raise my hand. I just wanted to add something. It's not really a question. Personally, I'm an advocate of the new position, and I would only say because it's a true leadership role as opposed to a management role. So where, you know, the position as it sits now is focusing on the tasks to complete certain individual tasks at hand. The health director would be looking at the systems and the processes, making sure each one of those individual roles are performing and firing on all cylinders. It's more about effectiveness and efficiency, and over the long run, you hope that you can actually reduce costs and improve or sustain performance or quality of performance. Just a statement. Thank you.
No, it's well said. You know, I think that's, you know, the hope a lot of us have in having something like this, and yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thanks for saying it. I wish I'd said it. I mean, frankly, is what I'm getting at. But yeah. Which chief? Which chief do we get first?
I'm going to nominate Chief Burns to go first.
Alphabetical. I get it.
I was hoping Chief Clark was going to go first, but so good evening. But before I jumped into the FY22 budget, I just wanted to take a minute or two and talk about FY21 budget. I did an analysis of the budget, and it looks like we're going to be $35,000 short for this fiscal year. And what the driver is the impact of COVID to our operations. We code our overtime and we're tracking our COVID-related expenses very carefully because it's reimbursable by FEMA. And depending upon what we're doing, it's a different reimbursement rate. So because like the police department and other departments, when this hit, we've been here every day responding, and right in the early parts of it all the way through. And we did have cases where firefighters came down as positive. So so that required them to be out of work. Sometimes some were out for 2 weeks, some of them were out of just under 2 weeks. But because we're such a close operation here, when somebody is positive, there are exposures. So that requires me to take somebody off duty that's an exposure. And so our costs in that area, we're not having people call up and saying, I have COVID-like symptoms, I can't come in. It's me finding out that there's been an exposure and me calling them and saying, you can't come in for X amount of days. And that's changed over this process. Initially, it was hard and fast, 2 weeks, and then it's changed, and we've been following the CDC requirements. So, but the other costs for us for the COVID response is the vaccination clinics. We've been providing EMS assistance and oversight to the clinics that we've run. And we've also had at each one of the clinics a number of firefighter paramedics that are doing the vaccination. And they're vaccinating people in the clinics, and we have done home visits for clinics for frail and elders. So that's resulted in the cost. So our COVID response costs were just under $52,000. So that's the driver that I see in the FY21 budget. So I wanted FinCom to be aware of that early and not to be a surprise to that. Also, we've actively, with emergency management, we've put in requests to be reimbursed by that for our expenses in all the other town departments. We have 2 filings in with FEMA right now. One's gone through the vetting process and is with FEMA right now, and the other one, that MEMA vetting process hasn't begun yet. And what's happened with that, there's been lots of changes to the reimbursement process as we've gone along. For instance, a month or so ago, they changed the reimbursement rate for vaccinations from 75% to 100%. But they have really required a considerable amount of backup material on all our filings. So it's been very labor intensive with that. So, but I wanted the board to be aware of that going into it. On our FY22 budget, we're not proposing any changes to the department staffing wise. We are responsible for the emergency management system, fire suppression, fire prevention, and also the emergency medical system. So we've got a lot going on here. If it wasn't for COVID, we would have been very busy just with our normal emergency response things. We had some major fires this year. Unfortunately, we had a fire fatality this year. And we have a number of grants that are in progress with FEMA that require reporting requirements. So it would be busy without COVID. COVID's taken it to a whole nother level. And our response to that is kind of 3 things. It's to provide the structure and the coordination to the town's response to it, to do the reimbursement from FEMA, and also to bring our staff and what our staff can do to help out, just like every other department, like the police department, like facilities, like DPW, like the school department, and town hall. At our vaccination sites, we've had help from every town department, including Reading Light, the school nurses, town hall staff. Jackie has been one of our participants helping out as well. So it's been a very town-wide effort into this response that's been really wonderful to see. And some things the community doesn't see what's going on, like the program that the town manager put together very quickly for people who couldn't afford to pay their mortgages or their rent. So with CARES funding, and so it's been a lot of work. But so the shift to the FY22 budget, we're not proposing any new staff. We are going through a transition where we're having people retire. Just in January, we had a captain and a firefighter retire. At the end of this month, we're going to have another captain and firefighter retire. So we're going to have 2 new captains by the end of this month and 2 new lieutenants by the end of this month. We've been able to hire 3 people to fill those 4 vacancies. We have 1 more to go. We're waiting for the new civil service list for that to fill that vacancy. We have 2 firefighters that are ready to go into the academy. They were scheduled to go in March, but that got moved to May as the fire academy had to retool their education program. They're doing a blended program now because of COVID. So they had to retool their program. So those new firefighters won't be out until August. The 2 new hirings, we have to outfit them with turnout gear and uniforms. So there's a request for an increase in those line items. So other than that, it's a fairly straightforward budget for us. We're still negotiating with the union, so we don't have a contract going from July 1st forward. But we do have everything else in place. And that's kind of my overview. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Chief. Hey, just getting back to the and maybe this is something for kind of relates to both to you, to Chief Clerk, but like for that, the circumstance that you mentioned where if someone was exposed, you had to, kind of quarantine, that bit of it. Is that something that's, that Chief Clerk, you saw also from the police as well? I guess, this is, kind of more of a question for you, Chief Clerk, on that side of it too. Did you have a similar circumstance?
Yes, we did. So for example, we had an arrest come in. Booking is a very small area. Officers in there, even though this is early on, even though they're trying to wear masks. The prisoner did come back positive COVID, we found out, and that whole shift had to go out. Early on, like the Chief Burns said, it was very concrete. 2 weeks, that's it, because we couldn't get testing early on. So it's 2 weeks you're out. As things progress, we've had some cases here and there. Most of them have been related to contacts with prisoners, detainees we're bringing in. And we did have to quarantine entire shifts, even though we've made adjustments where we don't have an in-person roll call anymore. Officers walk in the station, pick up their keys, go to their assigned cruiser. IT, I can't even tell you how helpful IT has been with us with changing how we do things, but they now check the log from the laptop in the cruiser and get their assignments, call off that they're on the air, then head out. And we're trying to limit contacts that way to limit the spread. But booking a prisoner seems to be our biggest issue when we've had exposures. And we have had to quarantine shifts, but now with the availability of testing and the CDC guidelines dropping a little bit, for example, and it changes every 15 minutes. So I could be telling you something that was okay at 4 o'clock, but now it no longer is. Day 5 with no symptoms, they can test out and come back on day 8, which was 14 days before. So that's made it helpful. But yes, just like the fire chief, we've had to quarantine entire shifts at a time. Thankfully, fingers crossed, and I know the fire chief felt the same way, I put dispatch into a bubble. We didn't let anybody go into dispatch. If we lost the dispatches, we would have been in, don't get me wrong, if you called 911, we'd still go. The state would have had to step in, or we've had to forward our phone calls to either a surrounding town. There is backups for this. So I want to make it sound like the town was unsafe or not covered. But we would have been in significant trouble staffing wise had we had a spread in dispatch. Physically, we just couldn't separate them. The systems are too delicate, too integrated. I know the fire chief and I, every week, we're kind of like, okay, fingers crossed, it's not dispatch, let's not get in there. So that's been good. But yes, we've kind of run into the same problem throughout the year with quarantines.
And maybe back to you, Chief Burns, you're kind of so related to that. So is that one of those things that are, grantable, for lack of a better term? Like, is there a way to be able to, kind of document that, or, kind of monetize that to something that you could, kind of apply, for, a grant, or, or funding, for that as it related to a COVID expense? Or is that, kind of one step too far?
No, it's reimbursable. So we had to remove an entire shift. We had a fire on a Sunday, and when they're in a fire environment, they can't wear a mask. They're wearing their SCBA, but you can't wear a mask underneath that. So it was a multiple alarm fire here in Reading, and then a couple of days later, one of our people came down with symptoms, got tested. He was positive. We sent the people in his station to be tested. We had another positive. We expanded out the testing to the group, and we had 2 more positives. So they were due to come in the next day, and I couldn't allow them to come in because that could just spread to another group. So we took the group offline. Now, I explained all that to FEMA in our reimbursement process, and it is an eligible expense, and it is part of our request to FEMA that's been gone through a number of steps in the vetting process, and that will be reimbursed at 75% rate. You don't have to be positive for it. An exposure is eligible for that. So very early on with this, we set up systems to track it, both police and fire, so we're aware of it, so that we can run those reports and document that for FEMA.
Yes, we've actually created separate codes, just like the fire department has. So internally, we can track it, and we work very hard, closely with Sharon and the fire chief to make sure that the specific codes for backfills that are taking off specifically for COVID are covered.
Yeah.
Marion, I see a hand up.
Yeah, this is just kind of following up with both the fire and police chiefs, and maybe I should already know this, but has every employee in both of your groups gotten both of their vaccinations by this point?
We made it voluntary here because you can't require somebody, but we had everybody but one person receive it. So from talking to fire chiefs in other areas, nobody's near that statistic. So we're very proud of that.
So hopefully that's going to help in both sides with future issues with exposure and having to quarantine staff because they've gotten vaccinated.
Facilities is kind of the unsung hero. They come in and decontaminate daily here, and they do a deep cleaning every week. They've done a number of things. They put around our administrative assistant, they put Lexian shields around to block her. There's just, we've built temporary bunk rooms in our training room. Turned our the remaining portion of our training room into a bigger area where firefighters can eat lunch and be socially distant. So we prohibit crews from one station coming down to the next to the Main Street fire station. So if we have a positive, we're not cross-pollination. So we've taken a number of steps, from vaccination to looking at our facilities to our protective equipment. We've done a number of things, and fortunately, for quite a while, we haven't had somebody become positive.
Well, that's good news. And like on the police side, I was struck when you talked about, you want to protect dispatch. Are dispatch considered first responders that they're able to have gotten if they wanted shots?
Yes. Yep. And I off the top of my head, I wasn't, the fire chief and the fire department and Assistant Chief Jackson have been unbelievable with getting the clinic set up and the vaccination. So, but I believe that almost every one of our dispatches got it and has both shots, but they did fall under the phase 1 for first responders. Initially, they left out, but Mass Chiefs and Mass Fire Chiefs went to the
Yeah.
governor and said, if there's nobody there to answer 911, you can't send the police and fire anyplace. There's nobody to send them. So they bumped them right up to phase 1, and we were able to get them vaccinated. So that's a kind of a huge relief for us and for the fire department.
Great. Well, I hope the issues that you described now are going to be moot for 22 or mostly. I mean, one can't predict with the new variants. Thank you. That was all.
Andrew.
Now, I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure the CDC put out guidelines that even if you did get both vaccinations, it has to be past 2 weeks from your second vaccinations in less than 3 months. So even if they did get both vaccinations after 3 months of having their second vaccination, if they're exposed, they still need to quarantine, right? But that's the current guidelines. That could change tomorrow, right? If I'm not mistaken, that's current guidelines, and they would still fall into the same quarantine procedures that you guys currently have in place, correct?
Yeah, so we do follow the CDC guidelines. We also have a medical director from Melrose Wakefield Hospital, standing physician, Dr. Alec Walker. We always run cases by him for his guidance, his depth of knowledge in that area, second to none. But we always follow his guidance or go a little bit above. And it does change on a regular basis. It is a struggle keeping up with
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief Burns. Appreciate it. Any other questions for Chief Burns?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you. So just like the fire chief, we were open throughout this whole thing. We did take steps to limit as much as we can interactions. The lobby remained open. That was never closed. Public could still come in emergencies if they needed it. We tried to shift over to, if somebody had a non-emergency call, we asked them to give us a cell phone number, and we'd actually have them go home. And that actually spread pretty quickly. We advertised on our social media, and people abide by it. They'd just call in, we'd have the officer call back. And if we needed more information, they could email the officer a photograph or any information, or we would swing by the house and pick up something. And that's how we kind of switched to handling non-emergency calls. But like I said, the lobby has remained open ever since. We did shift from an in-person roll call to actually, and also for contact tracing, assigning cruises. So we limited the amount of cruises the officers use. That way, if somebody did come back exposed, we could pull that one cruiser out of service and then just deal with a couple of officers using that cruiser and switched over. So we did adjust how we're doing things, but we've still been open. My administrative staff has been in since day one because certain things were still mandated for us to do and we couldn't change. Public records requests, we still had to do those, and a lot of that's paperwork driven. License to carry firearms, we still had to do in-person appointments and fingerprints. A lot of that didn't change for us. What did change was calls switched. So arrests are down, car accidents are down, not as much as you think, but car accidents were down. Certain types of calls were down, others skyrocketed. Mental health related calls were through the roof. Larceny, unfortunately, with unemployment fraud. And I'm sure some of you've seen what we've been getting hammered at the mailboxes. We've been working with the postmaster and Brad Jones. I called him. He called in to find out what's going on about getting those changed to safety ones. So we've been trying to get the mailboxes changed out to limit that. And fraud, credit card theft, unemployment fraud, domestic disturbances, domestic assistance, those kind of calls have really gone up significantly where others have gone down. So we are just as busy. You call 911, we'll be there, but we've just kind of shifted how we do the work in here. But like I said, it's been, for the most part, things that knock on wood have been going good, and we haven't had an exposure in probably since the fall when the spike came up after Thanksgiving. And it was, again, mostly related to prisoner contacts, what we've had. And prisoner, if they don't get bailed out, they could be with us for the weekend, and we have to check on them every 15 minutes. It's a closed area. Facilities was tried to help us out, but it was very limited what we could do in there because there's certain state guidelines with how the cell block is set up. Moving forward to next year, we're going to remain at staffed at 46 people. I'm not asking for an increase in staff. What I am asking to do is to shift a position and promote somebody and add an additional sergeant. A couple of years ago, there was a mandate to the state for a civil rights officer for reporting, for keeping track of hate-based crimes, hate-based incidents, and have a better tracking system. And that position has grown into, they want training, more public outreach with it. And that position has slowly changed where it can't be just an admin task for a regular officer. There's some things changing with it. That and the change in the police reform bill and a lot of new changes that are coming up. I feel that I need a supervisor to kind of oversee this and help us change policies and work with this. So again, I'm not asking to go up from the 46 officers. I'm just asking for creating an additional supervisor, and it's specifically for those kind of tasks. And that's what we're looking for, is changing the staffing. Right now, we just had 2 retirements, Officer Vogeland and Officer Savio just retired. And they are, so we hired 2 for them. We have 1 in the academy right now, but she's a great hire for us. But unfortunately, she was one of our public safety dispatchers. So we kind of stole her out of public safety to make her a police officer. So now I have to hire another dispatcher. Again, great hire, but it's kind of trickle down effect. But so we do need to hire 2 more. And we did recently promote our deputy chief. We do have a deputy chief in place now, Christina Amendola. And as a result, now we have to replace her. So we're going to be promoting a lieutenant, and then we're going to need to promote another sergeant. And so we're going to be having 2 new hires, another dispatcher hire, and a couple promotions coming up this year. For us, the academy is a 6-month long. You cannot, in Massachusetts, you cannot work as a police officer prior. So when we send somebody to academies, our biggest issue is the academies went from 50 people to 25 due to COVID restrictions. So it's even harder to find the academies now. And we hire somebody now, like we hired Kelsey, our dispatcher, in January. We're not going to see her out of the academy until July. Then she's going to go training. So she won't count as a body for me in the shift until probably September-ish when she gets done with her field training. So we do need to hire a couple more. The only other real increase you saw in our budget was I'm looking for more money related to professional development and training. With what's coming out with the new police reform bill, we know there's going to be a lot of training. And we've also really tried to expand on our training to deal with mental health related calls and whatever comes down with this new reform. So I'm looking for an increase in training and professional development. And that's what I've also asked for in dispatch too. That job, I'm on my 26th year now in the police department here in Reading. That dispatch job has changed significantly. And that job is vital. It's crucial to us. And the information they get now and update us to the fire department makes all the difference on how we respond to that call. And we really want to add, so I added more training and more professional development for the dispatchers as well. I can tell you that's probably the hardest job in town. I know I couldn't do it. I'll laugh and say I know for a fact the fire chief couldn't do it, but I don't want to insult Greg. But that's got to be one of the toughest jobs in town. And we really just I want to increase the training, and I want to make them the best as possible. And that's what we're looking to do, and increase any type of training we can, especially around mental health related calls and civil rights type calls, crimes, and make sure we're actually hitting all the areas we need to hit. The coalition, they have been phenomenal. Eric and Sammy, I cannot speak enough about them. That's probably the biggest increase in our budget. And a lot of it is because of, that came off the grant that just became under the town last year. And we're looking for an increase in what's called interface referral services. And that's a system they use to get help out to families that need it. And based on the amount of referrals we have made, our costs have gone up with that. And they're also using a new system called Apricot. And Eric and Sammy could do far more justice explaining it than I could. But it's basically a tracking software, and it tracks somebody from the initial call dealing.
Just put on mute.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Apricot is a new system that tracks people, and it's a better tracking system. And they tested it, and they love the system, and it's really been beneficial to them. So basically, from the time the person deals with the police or fire for mental health related or services or drug or alcohol, and it's totally confidential, none of the police officers can see it. They get to track the person all the way through to the end of services. That way nobody falls through the cracks. And it makes sure that the services, the follow-ups are being done, and it keeps everything into one system. And that Apricot system has been really worth it. So that's probably the 2 biggest expenses in the budget has been related to the coalition. And they've been phenomenal, especially during this. Sammy with the CIT program, Crisis Intervention Training. I know she works with our community service officer, helps with the domestic violence calls, domestic violence follow-up, works with the fire department, paramedic Joe Lapola, and human and other services. They all meet regularly and really help with a very vulnerable population and all variants of the population. They work as a true team. And it's that type of software programs that really help them monitor and just make sure we're not missing anybody and something doesn't get missed, especially during this crazy time. So those have been the biggest increases we're looking for. And I'm happy to answer other questions you have, but that's just a brief overview of what we're looking to change or add.
Thanks, Chief. Just a quick question. You mentioned, the staffing changes, and again, I forgot what happened yesterday, but like as it relates to what you've done historically, how does that look like from a hiring, kind of turnover perspective? Is that about the same? Is it a little bit? It sounded like a lot, but I'm struggling for a point of reference.
Are you referring to the promotions and hiring we're looking to do?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So Chris Volgan had 37 years of service. David Salvio had 26. They both retired, which caused us to hire 2 people. The deputy chief, once we knew that was, once that position was an in-house person, we had a backfill for that position as we move people up the ranks. So Deputy Chief Amendola was lieutenant. So now one of the sergeants is going to get promoted to lieutenant. A patrol officer or a detective or the safety officer might get promoted to sergeant. And then we'll have to fill that position and we're gonna have to hire to replace that person. So that's the most movement in there. And if I do get the second sergeant position, the supervisor position, again, the staffing will stay at 46. I'm just gonna shift around the staffing a little to have that supervisor help us with an area that's a desperate need. And I only see it growing larger throughout the next couple of years. That kind of help you, Ed, or am I just really off base?
No. It just, it doesn't sound like historically you've had that much, kind of movement, where you've had to kind of continuing to backfill.
It's been a few years. We've been stable in the promotion wise. We've had a lot of hires and retirements, but honestly, promotion wise, we've been stable for a few years now. So yes, it's kind of, we're at that, the time where we're losing a few people.
Yeah, gotcha. And I did see on here the line item for the increase in animal control. Is that just because all of us have dogs now?
So we actually don't, our animal control officer's out and not coming back. Bob, do you want to go into this? You want me to tackle it or?
Well, we're looking and we've looked at regionalizing this position for 140 years with every town except the one we're looking at now, which is a little more reliable. So, one of our neighbors has actually inquired, would you be interested in regionalizing and would you please have the employee? So, who knows where the discussion goes. I'm much more confident that something will now happen with this community. So maybe we end up splitting a full-time person. If that happens, this budget isn't adequate. We'll have to come back in November and make that a $60,000 figure, but then Sharon will have $30,000 of revenue coming in from the other communities to offset that. So it's kind of a placeholder just for a more of an effort. And, similar in parking enforcement, the parking enforcement animal control has been a shared job. It will not be going forward. And, the chief will have to get a sense of how much parking enforcement he wants done by a civilian, once there's a new model of staffing.
Gotcha. Thanks. Any questions from anybody else? I didn't see any. Thanks, Chief. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's it, right? We're through.
Minutes.
Whew, love it. All right. I can keep going. I'm just getting warmed up here. No, it sounds good. So thanks everybody first, from the top. Oh, Gene, just on a roll. Now you're gonna raise your hand. Go ahead, Gene. Oh, did you have a question?
Nope, I got nothing.
Oh no, so you're just giving me a virtual high five. That's what it was. I got it. No, so first, thanks everybody for the, kind of going through the budget, the presentation, answering all the questions. Thank you so much for all of that. Really, really helpful. And obviously you can just see all the tons of time and effort that went into it. So thank you very much for all that. So given that, let's get to the minutes and the approvals of the minutes. Does anybody have any questions around the minutes, or do I have I'll entertain a motion for the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes of February 24th.
Thanks, Mary Ann. Thanks, Jane. All right, well, we have to vote this, right? Yeah, I thought so. We did it last time. I just checking, making sure everyone's up to speed. All right, I'm gonna do it as I see you. Jean,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Mary Ann,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Andrew,
Yes.
and Ed, yes. 7-0. We're good. I'll entertain one more motion. Oh, actually, before I do that, before I should do that, do we have anything else? Any other points? Anything else anyone wants to raise before I ask for a motion? Perfect.
Move to adjourn.
Thanks, Gene.
Pleasure.
Second.
Thanks, Andrew. Gene,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Mary Ann,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
and Andrew.
Yes.
And yes, we're adjourned. Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jackie.
No problem. Thank you.